So it's kind of a pleasure to follow up on previous webinars. In this particular webinar, I'm not going to focus on all the changes that took place in 9104/1. I think we've covered that now in two previous webinars that get into the whole transition from multi-site and drop-in campus. What I want to focus on in this particular webinar is the OCAP tool, and one thing we haven't talked a lot about is PBSRP, and I've added a few slides into the back of this to focus on that. So I'm going to do a quick poll here and give you a minute to respond. Let me launch this, and three questions to answer. So in here, take a look at this, and I'll let you respond, and let's talk about it. All right, I'll give you another minute or so. We're up over 90 at the moment, so. See if we can break that 100 mark. All right, good. Still see some coming in. I'll hold off for a second. Okay. So it looks like we've got a pretty good mix of number of certification body, a lot of people from a multi-site, a lot of not applicables, few from campus, 17 out of 106, and 23 out of, a couple from several site. Good. The next question was about, are you or do you have internal auditors that are authenticated or equivalent to aerospace experienced auditors? We're looking at about 50%. Some others, about 24% no, and then several of you are representing certification bodies. And the last question is, what is your overall level of comfort with 9104-1? Okay. Mostly fall in the category of somewhat comfortable. I certainly relate to this. I think once we roll this out, once version 3 hits and we start working with it, we're going to get a lot more comfortable with it. But good, thank you. Okay. So let me get into the content here. Let me just give you a real quick look at so how we got to where we are today. Kind of the same front end that we've used in the past, but so as you know, 9104/1 was released in 2022. We are in the middle of implementing that. One of the gating items in doing that was the version 3 of OASIS, which according to my last set of input was imminent, probably in the late April, May timeframe that we're going to see that come out. So this piece, as I said, I'm going to focus on OCAP and PBSRP. We'll give you a chance to look at it. I'm going to give you a different point of view. Typically, I present this and I only do the single site approach. I will give you a demo in here. I'll talk a little bit about downloading the tool. But I do have a multi-site demo in here, so you'll see a little bit different look than you've seen before. We'll talk about PBSRP. When the committee got together and talked about where we were going, we wanted to reward high-performing company, and that's where PBSRP comes in. If you're a high-performing company, you can take advantages of several reductions in audit duration and things like that. So, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We do think more and more companies may take part in this and take advantage of PBSRP, unlike in the past, where you only really had 3 companies in the world that were leveraging the old ASRP system. So I do think we'll see more and more companies taking advantage of this, especially if they can meet all the criteria. It is a high set of criteria to meet, but we'll cover that in a minute. So the point of these tools are really to help you in the audit planning. One thing we learned, if you recall, in the when we set out to do this, this should be a familiar slide to most of you here, but when we set out to change 9104/1, we recognized a lot of things, like one, ISO, the IAF had really caught up with a lot of things that we initially had incorporated into our standard. One thing that if you look at this, you really, I'm constantly, even today, I get people saying, oh, you dropped that particular concept. Well, we probably didn't. It probably is already in 17021. So between that and the mandatory documents in our document, we tried not to repeat and we tried not to overlap, but we created a document that could stand alone. But to really understand requirements, you need to look at all of them. Look at the mandatory documents, look at 17021. Things that you may thought you were missing probably are covered somewhere else. Certainly our mantra through the whole thing is we want competent auditors at the appropriate location, given a sufficient amount of time to create a value-added audit and report. And that was our objective. So let's talk a little bit about definitions here. We have OCAP, the definition is Organization Certification and Analysis Process. We recognize that in the early days of what we were doing, you think about the flow of a certification body. I mean, typically an auditor is probably on a plane or driving somewhere to kick off an audit on Monday. They kick off that audit, they work all week, they wrap up the report, they may even do a little bit of that on the weekend to clean it all up. And Monday morning, you get back at another site. And we recognize that we could probably do a better job if we allowed a little bit more time for the planning and getting involved in some of understanding that site a little bit better. Because, and even now that I'm being in the role of a certification body auditor myself, having some information up front is very valuable on the paths that we may go down. So the OCAP tool was created for that reason, to really force certification bodies and auditors to think about the site before you actually go on site. And actually gives you a chance to really hit the road running. Sometimes auditors would spend a lot of time just trying to get familiar with what's happening before they can dig into the audit. So this is really a tool to help us do that. The other thing it does is helps us adjust time. And if you are a high risk company, it will give us the ability to bump up the time at least 10% and maybe even more. I already mentioned PBSRP, that stands for Performance-Based Surveillance / Recertification Program. It is a modification to the old mandatory document. And if you're familiar with ASRP, the Advanced Surveillance Recertification Program, that was around for a number of years, that particular document was dropped. The AS9104 team went to the ISO committee and got permission to keep ASRP in place because we had a number of key OEMs tied into ASRP and replace it with PBSRP. And we did present this whole thing to the ISO committee, and they are on board that we did not violate any of the rules of ISO. Well, real quick, I really wasn't going to cover this, but anyway, that slide, maybe because I hid this slide, but real quick, there were a lot of reasons why we went away from campus. And again, I think Tim Lee, who headed up this committee, has covered this in great detail. The big story there was we weren't in compliance with the ISO documentation, especially MD5. And that was one of the reasons we decided, we're going to do what everybody else does. So the whole single site, multi-site is an ISO platform. We created several different layers in this way back when we started this, but things have changed, and we determined that the best way to move forward was to go back to the MD1 and the MD5 and use that justification for the sites. Okay, let me take a quick poll here. Kind of see where you're coming from. There are 3 questions in here. The first one is, are you considering PBSRP? The next one is, are you familiar with AIM, the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model? And the last one is, would you like to schedule additional time with Plexus? So let me launch this. I'll give you another minute or so, and I'll share what we have. Give you 15 seconds. Let me close this off. Okay, let's look at the results. Good. Actually, I'm 20% are saying yes, absolutely. I think that's great. It is funny, the more people learn about it. I had the opportunity, I was working, doing a CV audit the other day, and I had an opportunity to talk to the quality manager about PBSRP. And once they knew about it, they showed a lot of interest in it. And I do think it's fair that 37% are unsure. We're getting used to it. We need to understand it. Hopefully, maybe you'll come out of this session and say, hey, this is something we really should pursue. But good. Next one. Probably a topic for another day. One of the powers of AIM, and I just encourage you to go look at that. I'm not covering it in this particular webinar, but AIM is an excellent tool, and I believe there's already a webinar out there on AIM. But it's an excellent tool as you try to advance and move your company forward into a best of class situation. It's an excellent tool to take a look at. And the last one here is okay. Good. All right. All right. All right. Couple terms, and if any auditors are out there, I do think we do cover this in the Delta training, but just to remind you a little bit about some of the changes that took place. I mean, MD5 changed in the ISO community, the International Accreditation Forum, did a better definition of what time an audit duration is. So just recognize audit duration, which most our tables are built on. That audit duration time is from the opening meeting to the closing meeting and everything that takes place in the middle of that. audit time includes audit duration, but it also includes the audit prep. So things like the OCAP tool, which will be happening on the left-hand side, and the audit report writing, which will be happening on the right-hand side, are included in the audit time calculation. We have a very simple approach to this. We bump, when we calculate the audit duration, we bump it by 20%. It's really kind of assumed that you can use the time, for the certification bodies, you can use the time in any way you'd like, but just recognize that sometimes should be devoted to some of that. It almost ends up being like 10% up front and 10% on the back end. But understand those concepts. It did influence how we created the tables and how we address this. And again, if you're an auditor, if you're looking at Delta training, I do believe they cover that topic. So remember this: audit duration is opening to closing meeting. Audit time is including audit prep and report writing. You've seen this chart before, but let me, and we've kind of touched on this, but this is really the foundation of the OCAP tool. This information gets loaded into the OCAP tool. So first off, you need to understand what type of sites you're looking at. We do recognize right now, we've got several sites that are probably transitioning to multi-sites. We have complex that are being kind of broken up, which there weren't that many, but they're broken up into different types of structures. We did find with the campus, when we did our analysis, a whole chunk of campus audits would end up being single sites and some would end up being multi-sites. We also recognize in the standard, you do have virtual situations. We are seeing in some of our analysis that the central function sometimes is virtual. And that's the reality, and we're allowing that. It is covered in the standard. The risk analysis, I'm going to go through this in detail, but the risk analysis is all trying to assess that company. This particular step in the process will happen about 60 days in advance. So you need to be prepping the sites that are going to be audited in 60 days in advance. They need to be providing you information. When we get to the demo, you'll see that there's a section in there, about 50% of that tool, that risk analysis, they define. The organization defines it. We need to check it, but the organization defines it. And you need that data up front because you can't do audit duration until we understand where they fall in the tool. So you see a couple things in there. We will look at internal audit complexity, customer satisfaction, and so on. In the end, we're going to rank them high, medium, or low. And if you are a high risk site, you get an automatic 10% bump in audit duration. If you're low, you get an automatic 10% reduction in audit duration. So it's going to help us set the right time for each organization. Audit time, as we've mentioned, this is one of the things we did allow. If you were to add in, again, some of you have been around for a while. I mean, if you had ever had somebody looking at your audit plan, they might look at it and go, "Oh, you can't put report, you can't put report writing into your plan." Well, we now allow that, but it's not part of the 8 hours. That it's still independent, but you can do it on site. You can do it off site. And again, audit time includes audit duration, and that is actually auditing in the opening and closing meeting. So, and on the left-hand side, one of the things we are emphasizing, and especially as we move forward in this, we want you to be very, very clear on what standard they're working to, and does it meet the applicable IAQG standards? And are we clear on what the core processes are? I had a situation the other day. I'm looking at a certification. I had no clue to what they did. I'm reading it going, so do you manufacture? Do you design? I'm reading it. I'm like totally confused. One of the things this new standard is promoting, and there's a line in the standard about being very clear on what your core processes are so that we understand whether you're a design facility, are you manufacturing, is it clear? And are you using the right standard? In here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift screens here and let me walk you through a demo. So let me finish the slide. Just so you know, there's really nothing in here that's going to that doesn't come from some foundation. When you think about customer focus, it's already in the standard. 5.1.2 talks about understanding product and service conformity and on-time delivery performance. So this organization needs to know it, they need to measure it, they need to be able to present whether or not they're achieving those objectives. Customer satisfaction, 9.1.2, how do you measure that? Information needs to be monitored and used. So we're not really adding anything over and above. We're not asking them to do anything that they shouldn't already be doing as part of their normal process. And again, as I mentioned, if you are high risk, we're going to be adding 10%. We do suspect, an initial look at some of the data, we do suspect most companies will probably end up in the middle with no change, and then some will end up with a reduction. Let me jump to the demo. So a couple things, and Chris, I'm going to ask you, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can see the Excel?
Correct.
Perfect. Let me give you a couple of hints. If you go to the OASIS database, Dead Center, and I don't believe you need to be signed in or anything, Dead Center, there's a hyperlink to 9104/1 changes. You click on that hyperlink, it'll take you into a separate file, and in that file, there is this tool called the OCAP tool, version 1.47. That is the most current tool that's out there. Real quick history on this tool, we worked a lot with a prototype. We did turn this over to a group to make it a little bit more user-friendly. I hope for those of you that are using this, so you do find it a little bit more user-friendly than the prototype. Recognize that prototype went through a lot of transition back and forth and things coming in and out. So it went through a lot of iterations, and once we pretty much locked it down, we turned it over to group to make it, again, once a little bit more user-friendly than what we had before. So when you download it, let me give you a couple hints. One thing I found that when I tried to download it, it wouldn't download. It did show up in my download file. All I did was go in and change the extension to zip.zip, and it opened up. And when it opened up, I was able to open up the file. So if you're having trouble and you click on it, for some reason it doesn't pop up for you, go into your downloads and see if there's something called unconfirmed in there, and put zip after it, and it should open up, and you should be able to get into this document. It'll have this is not the cover page. It'll come up, it'll say version 1.47. And this is the second tab. So once you click on it, this is the first tab that opens up. So just a reminder, in here, one of the requirements we put into the standard was that we need to be clear on what standards, what AS standards they're using. This particular page serves two functions. One, it helps the standards committee understand all the work that's been done by all these OEMs in developing these standards. I mean, OEMs and CBs is really the aerospace community. There's a lot of work that goes into putting this in place. And if we're not using it, this is good information to flow back to that committee so we can go somewhere else if we need to get another standard or whatever. But it helps them, gives them some direction. So that's the one reason we ask the question. The other reason we ask the question is, as an auditor, if you tell me you're 9102 compliant to first article inspection, now I understand where the requirements are coming from. So it creates audit trails. And so we ask this right up front. We want to know which standards are being, and if you look up here in the top, we want to see what was contractually flowed down. So you answer the question, and I'll just run through an example here. So first article inspection, was it contractually flowed down to you, and are you compliant? I would hope the answer is yes, if it got flowed down to you. So, but you may be voluntarily compliant. You may have no customers. An organization may not have a customer that flowed down 9102, but you chose to set up your system that way. So you are now using the 9102, and we've got evidence that you're using that. You may have chosen, maybe it wasn't flowed down, and maybe you did a modification to it. So you might put in here that, yeah, we use parts of it, and then you would click that off. So let's just say here, and the one good thing about this, I'm going to say yes, it got flowed down. You can see you can't be the other two. You're either one or the other. Let me jump down here because it's a good example. But if I look at 9146, which is foreign object damage, I am finding, I looked at a company the other day, and although they probably would click off that, yes, they're compliant with 9146, they could have said, no. They could come over in here and saying, we are compliant to NAS 412, and we do not look at 9146. And again, this is good information. We get this incorporated into our system. We can gather this and we can make decisions about where we proceed. We might find NAS 412 maybe superior to what we're writing here, and there's no value in creating a separate document for it, hypothetically. So, next, we get into the audit program, and I started setting this up early, so you're not watching me type, but put it in an organization. Couple things in here, just to, you want to capture the organization. This, at the highest level, you can see here a multi-site. Notice we've dropped in some hints in here. If you're looking for the definition of a multi-site versus a single site, we incorporated this language, comes right out of the mandatory documents. In my example, I'm saying they're not PBS RP, and I'm going to do a surveillance on it. The OIN number comes from OASIS. And down here, just so you have this is entirely up to you. But hypothetically, if I'm a certification body, maybe I have a different numbering system that I want to capture in this tool. This is entirely up to you. You can leave it blank if you would like. But just fill in this header information. Now you're off and running. You have to do, per the standard, you have to do a risk assessment for the entire organization. And that's why this pops up as number 2. And in here, let me point out a couple things. So the first thing you're going to ask is complexity. How complex is the organization we're dealing with? Now, these tables are all in 9104/1. Go look at them there. But if we did, in some cases, pop the information down below the line here. So if I'm looking at an organization, I'm going to go in here, and if they're a single, if you're talking multi-site, you're probably in the top bar here. You're talking, a large simple or a large complex. If you're talking a single site, you may be here, you might be up here, but think about the organization. A lot of our suppliers, they have very few processes. They might not be doing design. The minute you start kicking in design, you're going to probably slide out of the low into medium. You can see here, there's no design. But it really helps you determine where they're going to land. And again, the probability is that most sites are going to be in this medium category, but you are going to have some that are low or high. So in my example, I picked a medium for complexity, and this is a drop down. Again, there's some language in here. I can slide over here and again, go see the table 5. Or if I want medium, again, go see the table 5, and there's a definition of how you get there. The internal audit program. We recognize there are a couple things that are critical in our process. And when we get into PBSRP, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But the internal audit program, we see as a control point. They're overseeing the organization's performance, their compliance, their effectiveness. So if you've got a robust internal audit program, that's going to certainly reduce the overall risks. The one other thing I'll just mention here, because we'll talk about it in PBSRP, we also look at management review, because it is another control point, making sure the organization is performing as designed. So in here, I put my internal audit program. I do think, when you're talking low risk, you're talking about a properly resourced audit program, a year-long audit program, meaning you audit the full QMS annually, an audit program driven by risks and data. So what this means is I can be over here and go, yep, we have a internal audit program, we have an annual event. We do it once and we've got it done for the year. This one is saying, hey, you need to be looking at the data. If you've got high risk areas, you probably should be going back doing additional audits. If some area didn't do well, are you making sure and following up? And you're letting the data drive how you set that up. That is a low risk audit program. And then high risk is, and not to pick on programs that use this risk-based approach. And I'm not saying it's wrong. You can be compliant with the standard, but what we're saying is if you're only doing risk-based type programs, you're not covering the entire QMS, and that does increase the risk of what we're looking at. I picked medium. Again, it's a drop down. I picked the medium. This comes up low, medium, high. On-time delivery. Again, it's up to the organization to define it. How do they define that for the organization? How do they define it to meet the requirement of the standard? And there's some information in here about that. The language in here is a little bit different. Are they meeting the requirement? Are they exceeding the requirement? Or are they below the requirement that they've set? As an auditor, that is an audit trail. If you go in there and you find out, oh, we set our on-time delivery at 50%. And you go and you pull data and you're looking at customer report cards and they're sitting there going, oh, well, customers, they're rating them as being low because they're not above 90%, then certainly we would challenge their selection of on-time delivery. The next category is quality escapes. There's some language in here if you're looking for direction on this, but really, how do they measure that? It's really about conformity. What is their process to make sure they're meeting the quality requirements in the various levels? Just so this one kind of tipped off as a high risk. I put this not meeting their on-time delivery and not meeting their quality objectives. Customer satisfaction, again, it exceeds or meets or below. And again, there's some definition here on how to fill that out. But again, what are they looking at? How do they rate themselves and come up with it? So again, the organization manages these three. They need to define how they meet these three. The last one is pairs. And it really is what it comes down to is kind of the weakest link theory. So if you do 5 pairs in an audit or 4 or 5 pairs in an audit, and you have one pair that's sitting at a 1 or a 2, that's the number you pick. You want to pick the lowest number of the set of pairs. So if you did 4 and you had one that was a 2 and everything else was 4 and 5, you're still going to take that one number, that 1, 2, and pick it over here. So where they didn't achieve their objectives in their pairs, and that's what you populate this with. So you can see the drop down. So my lowest number is either a 1 or 2, a 3 or 4 or a 5. Initially, if you could be not applicable, if you got a brand new site right out of the chute that you don't have a pair yet, then you would populate it not applicable here, and it comes out of the calculation. So in this example, you can see this ended up being high risk. There's a numbering system behind this, but it ends up being a high risk, and then we carry that forward into the next page. PBSRP, you'll notice here, it said no. You did not check that off. If you're going to have PBSRP, you're going to come back here to the audit program and click that off and add that in. So little mistake proofing in the process here. So let me jump to the sites. So this is a multi-site. You have to have a central function for the multi-site. And I would encourage you to go look at the definition in MD1. I'm seeing things which really don't meet that definition. We debated for a while, do we put a number in here? Because most definitions of a central function is that group of people that manage the QMS. And it's probably not 200, 300, 400 people. It's probably a much smaller group of people, but it is a requirement. You need to put in a central function. So I put one in here. I already preloaded one. I said, okay, this central function, we called it headquarters. And I populated that, and you're going to see that this number in a minute. Let me, just for the sake of showing you how this works, I'm going to add one more site. So you can see it popped up and said, okay, this is going to be site number 2. And it's going to be at site 2 address. It is not the central function. By the way, if you're looking for the definition, this comes right out of MD1. This may help you define what that central function looks like. Put that in here. They're going to be AS 9100. And this is a very important field. How many people were we talking about? So I'm going to put 450 people into this, and you can see it's already done the initial duration calculation. In here, let's just say this site that I'm looking at, they're not managing the QMS. It's actually being managed by the central function. So I'm going to take that out. I'm also going to take out design and development because that's going to be done by my second site that's in there. So what they're doing is they're doing purchasing and they're doing design. And you can see here, it's already calculating reductions because of this. And again, the new thing, if you haven't seen this before, if you recall in the old system, the only reduction you really ended up taking was if you were a design or less design. So now you can do more. If we've recognized that some of your bigger companies, they've centralized purchasing. You're going to go into probably a lot of sites that don't do purchasing. It's done somewhere else at a central location, especially some of the big multi-sites. So we give you the option of dropping that out. That's a difference because you think about standard. We always said you have to do purchasing in every single audit. We also recognize you could have an engineering house. So why can't you take a reduction for the fact that you don't do manufacturing? We've allowed that. So we've opened that up and we're giving you reductions to support this. You can, for the certification bodies and for everybody your information, you can add time. If you need translators, you can add time. This is a free field. This is coming in and just adding what you need to make this happen. This got bumped for additional time, and so it doesn't show up here. But we did say they were high risk. So they got an add of 0.6 days because they are a high risk company. So that this kind of flowed, these are hooked together. I won't go into it today. We don't really have a lot of time to cover integrated systems, but it is in here. And there are some standard rules in here. If you do have integrate with another standard, you can click that off, put a number of people in here. It does a 50% cut off the duration to cover that because they are overlapping what you already have in existence. And you can see down here at the bottom, they get a 20% bump. So a couple things when you look at the numbers, this gets rounded and this one does not. So audit time is a little bit, we don't round the time, but we do round the audit duration to the next half day. So that's how this goes in. Let me get back here. We have our site. I'm sorry, I got to add it. So down at the bottom, I'm going to save this change. And now we've got this site in here. You do have the option of removing it. I do think as you move forward, multi-sites, there'll be opportunities to add and drop sites. I don't believe you're going to have to recreate this every time. You should be able to pull this up. You'll have your history. You can repopulate it and reset it when we go into the following year. So here's a quick, these are the sites. They're all listed here. You can see the reductions that were taken. I didn't take any reductions up here. The central function, just FYI, if they're doing design and manufacturing and all that, you might go, well, they're not doing it. Well, they're managing it. So we leave it in there. That if they're doing all that, it gets captured here. This particular site, my site 1, didn't have any reductions. And so it got dumped in just as it is. And we get our total. So let me pop over here, time reallocation. This is kind of one of the things the standard allows you to do is to float some time. So if you look in here, I'll just point out a couple of key lines in here. We have the headquarters, we have site 1 and site 2. I do think if you ever get into PBSRP, we do encourage you to do a site-by-site calculation of risk. That way it might help you better load time and understand if you've got high risk sites to go focus on. But in here you can see, and I must have missed a number here, but just the point is over here is your adjustment. So I look at margin. So this 1.8 on site 2, they're up by 1.8. Now, I would look at this and go, okay, it's up because they're high risk. I probably wouldn't touch it, but let's just say they're medium and they're not high risk. And you go, hey, I would rather spend a little bit more time in site 1 because we've got some issues over there. And you're going to be able to do that. What you're going to do is going to pop in here and go +1 or -1, but you can now reallocate time within the multi-site. In the end, you cannot change the bottom number. So if the total audit is, you know, in our example here, it looks at 5, 6, 7. It's about 8 days. You can't change that, but you can move time around a little as long as you don't meet or violate the minimum, which is a 50% of your duration. You do that, you're going to be in compliance with MD5. This table is set up to make sure this little green pass is if you change this, if I put in -1 for an example, you can see you don't pass because I got to put that day back in. It's got to go back in somewhere. Now that I got it, here we go. Put it back. And the last page is a summary page, and you're going to be able to look and say, okay, what have I got here? And again, I apologize. I think I put it in a day incorrectly because I don't have a calculation here, but this is what it'll look like. We'll have the central function, the site 1, site 2, quick summary of the number of employees. The audit duration will be calculated and audit time will be here for each site and the grand audit time for each site as well. Okay, I'm going to move on to PBSRP. So let me share, go back to the other screen. Just check, Chris, can you see that?
Looking good. Yep.
Okay, good. All right, we have talked about this. Let's talk a little bit about PBSRP. In here, we do recognize it is a high criteria to get into it. This chart here comes right out of 9104/1. It does lay out the minimum requirement to apply for this. And I do believe the certification bodies are setting up a methodology to apply. The intent was that the site would apply for acceptance into the PBSRP program and probably provide some additional evidence on why they believe they should be there, but they have to meet this criteria. So A is they have to have gone through a 3-year cycle. They can't be out of the chute, brand new AS 9100 client in applying for PBSRP. They have to have gone through at least 1 cycle to prove that they meet the requirements and consistently, and we have the data to support that. The OCAP risk analysis, so we go back to the OCAP tool, they cannot be high risk. So if they come to you and they're already high risk, there's an issue there. And you should not be granting PBSRP. They need to be low or medium. And we picked medium. We didn't say just low because if you look at it, some of those categories, you know, you don't really control complexity and things like that. So we're allowing a little bit of wiggle room there because you can fall in that category, but at least you should not be high risk to be in the program. Bullet C is all about your performance. So implementation, it's implementation of an internal audit program in accordance with 19011. And some of the things we're looking for in here is annual audit of all applicable AQMS requirements, a defined structured multiple event program that adjusts throughout the calendar year, based on performance, customer complaints, risk, and change management. So what we're saying essentially is that that OCAP tool said that criteria that you're looking right here is low risk. Essentially, we're saying your internal audit program needs to be low risk in that tool. D, it kicks it up a notch on your training though. What we're saying is your internal auditor competency needs to be equivalent. Auditors that have passed a TPAB approved ASD lead auditor course. Now, we're not saying they have to be certified, but they have to have taken the aviation, space, and defense lead auditor class and pass that class. E is organization has an ethics policy, becoming more and more important everywhere. The F is you have no externally identified major nonconformities as defined by 9101 in the following categories of internal audit, management review, corrective action processes issued to either the central function or a single site structure organization. So language here is really if your management review process at the central function is written up with a major, you don't qualify for PBSRP. We isolated single site because you can be PBSRP and a single site, and it's bigger than just the central function. We recognize that, but that is the central function when you're dealing with a single site. You can't have been suspended within the past 6 years. Past 6 years. So you can't have a suspended certification in that time period, and you have to meet customer satisfaction metrics based on customer provided data. So we got to have the objective evidence that you're meeting their objectives. That's the criteria we recognize is a little bit high, but high performing companies that meet all this criteria can take advantage of the PBSRP program. This is just a real quick look at the benefit. I mean, if you are going to do this, what you look at is if you're a multi-site, you get 1/3 of your sites are done and the central function. You look down here in the bottom line here, but 1/3 of your sites is done over every year until you get the whole over a 3-year period. Unlike the other system, the current system, and if you're not PBSRP, you're going to have a full QMS on a recertification year, meaning every single site's going to get audited and the central function. And then you do 50% and 50% in your surveillance years, year 2 and year 3, and the central function. So you can see here, this is a third, a third, a third. This is 100%, 50%, and 50%. You get a significant reduction if you're going to go after PBSRP. This chart, I won't go through the whole thing, but this is really kind of quick. This chart is in 9104/1. It's kind of walks you through how you do this. If you're a multi-site or a single site, it talks about that 3-year criteria, meeting the qualifications. And down here, you can see the benefit to a single site structure. They're going to get a 33% reduction in audit duration off the top, regardless of whether it's a surveillance or a recertification. And by the way, if you're a multi-site, you get that same 33% reduction. And just to be clear, you can't go below 50% of what MD5 calls up for that population, but recognize you get a 33% bump right up front. So if you were to add in, well, I don't do purchasing here and I don't do design, you're going to exceed the 50%, but and that will come back. But you have that 33% to play with. I'll let you look that over. In the end, if you qualify for all that, this is where the benefit of being in PBSRP is. So. Okay, we talked about this already. There is a little line in here, which I'd like to recap. I mean, I've done a little bit of work on the AIM tool. I do recommend, if you're not familiar with it and you see some desire in going after PBSRP, the AIM tool is not that it will get you there, but it will establish really some best class practices so you can evaluate your company against those best class practices, and a good tool to help you get and achieve that PBSRP level. Topic for a different webinar, but I do think it's well done and helps companies improve. All right, let me just wrap this up. Again, 9104/1 is going to be coming out shortly. We're currently working. There will be supplemental rule SR004, which will talk about what needs to happen in the transition. We are coming close. One of our key dependencies was the OASIS version 3. You look at some of the information we looked at today, you can't do that in the current OASIS system. So that's been kind of one of our gating items to moving forward with this. And I do think this literally within the next 3 months, we're going to see some changes, and we're going to have that version 3 available to us. And there is a line in here, take a look at it. If you're looking for a tool, go take a look at AIM. It is well done and will help you improve your organization. So, and I think at this point, I'm going to turn this back over to Chris.
Thanks, Darrell, and thanks for taking us through that today. Folks, before we jump into Q&A, if you do have any questions for us, please feel free to submit those via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If we don't get to it, we'll shoot you an email response. But Darrell, just jumping in here, real quick, first question. Do we have a quick update on the 9104 implementation timing? Someone was curious.
I'm a little bit outside of the committees. I can tell you what I've heard. I do think what I'm hearing is the accreditation bodies are ready to go. So the certification bodies are need to get at that level and be ready to go as well. And I can't tell you where they stand. There is a timeline. I would encourage you to go look at SR 004. There is a timeline in there of when things have to happen. But I do think, I believe there will be CVs doing this as early as June. If that version 3 OASIS and training that comes along with it happens, they'll be ready to go. So the CVs that I've been associated with, they're already working it. They're just gearing up and just about ready to throw the switch when everything's in place so that they can move forward.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, folks, a copy of this webinar will be available on our website or YouTube following the live event, as well as a link emailed to all registrants. Next question, can we still use EAC activity code to measure the risk level as we proceed with ISO 9000, for instance?
The EAC code?
EAC activity code? We might need more information on this question. If you could resubmit. I'll go to the next one. This one might be easy for you, Darrell. Where to download or obtain the latest OCAP tool?
Okay, the latest one is out on OASIS. Log into the IAQG OASIS website. I don't think you have to log in. I think you'll see right on the cover page, dead center, they talk about transitioning 9104/1, 2, and 3. Click on that hyperlink. It will bring you to a number of files, and the OCAP tool is one of them. And as I said up front, I did run into a couple problems. When I downloaded it, it did not come over clean. It wouldn't open for me. I did find that I had to go in and drop in .zip next to the download, and then it opened up and it was in that tool. So that should help.
Does look like I got a comment. Some of our users are having that same problem. Folks, what we can do is send over a note to IQG as well and have them check on that page just to ensure we can do. Now, related to OCAP, does the organization complete OCAP or does the auditor ask and complete?
I suspect, and I don't want to really speak for certification bodies, but I suspect the certification body is going to set up a system to do that work. Certainly, it's a cooperation. I don't know that they're going to finish the tool. They should ask for it. I would say they're welcome to see it. But anyone can see it. But it is a cooperation. Clearly, a CB can't do it without the right information. So there's an opportunity there to do that. For an auditor, they're going to follow up on some things. So if you tell them that we are at low risk for on-time delivery, they should follow up on that. So they should be looking at it going, okay, that's great. Let's go prove it. And then let's incorporate that into our report. So.
Great, thank you. How can we verify that the info sent by the client in OCAP is correct?
It's going to be up to the auditor. They're going to have to follow up on it. We've been pushing honesty and integrity in our process. We expect that out of our clients, out of the organizations as well. I would just say, there may be a reason for it. What is their justification? Look at their justification, work with them on it. So We're only talking 3 levels. You know, to me, it's not that complex. You know, we're talking high, medium, or low. So, you know, figure out what, you know, you take on-time delivery, and maybe that's one example, but you take on-time delivery and they're sitting at 75%, and all their customer report cards say they want them at 90% or better. If you're going to set that goal at 75%, there better be a really good justification for it, especially if the customer is hammering them with report cards that's saying you're in the red and yellow. That doesn't fly. Now, I'll give you the flip side of that. I mean, you could go into a site and say, okay, they're sitting there they're sitting at 70%, and their customers are perfectly happy with that. I'll give you one real quick example. Is an organization I work with, kind of an interesting group. They're a think tank. They don't really care about on-time delivery. They work so closely, shoulder to shoulder. They might write a contract. They put a date on it that I need it by a certain date. But if they're working and they're out there, and they are out there, they're a group that's you know, looking into the future of what products and things are going to look like. It's perfectly acceptable to have a 70% on-time delivery with them, and they can justify it. And that's why I don't judge if they put, as an auditor, I don't look at that and go, okay, it's real. I don't have a single customer complaint. I can live with that. So,
related to that one, do we ask for objective evidence that the info on OCAP is correct?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. These are all audit trails. I mean, when you think about it, you think about what we put into that risk analysis. Complexity, that's going to be pretty easy to figure out. You do your schedule, you're going to know that. You think about on-time delivery, quality escapes, customer satisfaction, they're going to have to define it, and they're going to have to justify it where they sit. You can do the pairs yourself, look up the last pair. You should be able to figure that one out. But the rest, they're going to have to justify. It's going to have to be objective evidence.
Great. We'll go with the last one. And folks, thanks again for joining us today. Last question. With so many remote workers nowadays supporting the manufacturing process, customer service, purchasing, design, etc., how are they considered when identifying employee numbers for sites?
Say that again?
Remote workers, how are they considered when identifying employee count for sites?
They should be counted. You know, we're going to go on to a site, and if they have remote people that are supporting that site, it's got to fall in some bucket, and they should be counted. It's going to be part of the audit. My experience, and again, but you know, we're talking to those people. We might be in a conference room and they're calling in, and that's real. That's okay. And the standard, actually, when we wrote it, we did make an adjustment. The pandemic taught us a little bit about what happens in the remote world. And so we opened the bandwidth saying, yep, you have to be on site, but you can do 50% of it offsite. So a lot of combinations. I'll give you one quick example. We did learn, the data showed us that we did not do an effective job auditing things like manufacturing. This is just very difficult. It's not always about what's directly in front of you in that conversation. It's what's around the environment that you pick up on. And you can't see that if you're doing a remote. You're held to whatever that computer screen is that they're showing you. Conversely, we found that areas like engineering, we were doing, no, I wouldn't say, we did see a slight dip, but we found that they were, you know, not too far off. So you probably can do an effective audit of like things like purchasing so I'm seeing combinations where CBs are sending out and saying, okay, one auditor is going on site. They're going to focus on manufacturing. One auditor, we're going to save some money. We're going to save them for having to fly all over the place. They're going to do it remote, and they're going to do everything that's they can effectively do remotely. So, and they're probably talking to remote people as well. So,
yeah. Well, thanks very much, Darrell. Darrell, appreciate your time today. Folks, appreciate your time as well. If you're looking for more information, make sure to visit Oasis. You can visit plexusintl.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us directly. And we would appreciate you filling out that post-event survey. Thanks again. Have a good one. Thanks, Darrell. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye.